As you might be aware, many employees feel underappreciated, not because their work is not recognized, although that can be part of it too, but because their abilities aren't recognized, their capabilities, what they can do when given the chance. People bring any number of gifts with them to the workplace every day that go underappreciated, underutilized because they're not recognized. When people feel this way, they disengage and they check out. And you can change all this through my assets inventory for the enterprise program. Using proven community development techniques around assets-based community development, you can take better stock of the talent you have, the capabilities they possess, the aptitudes that they have inside of them, and find creative ways of connecting it to your organizational strategy to create a win for everyone. And who doesn't want to win? Contact me, Gary David, at gary@garyconnects.com to learn how you can inventory the gifts your employees have to give and create more connected organizations for better outcomes for everyone. Now, on with the show.
1, 2, 3.
Hi, I'm Gary David. Welcome to Experience by Design, the podcast where we explore experience designs of all kinds. I hope all you EXDers out there are doing well, enjoying the spring. If you practice getting ready for the major religious holiday of Easter, always a bigger one, honestly, than Christmas in terms of its significance, but not surprisingly, Christmas gets most of the attention. What are you going to do, right? But Easter's coming up. I hope you're having a good Easter or whatever other holidays you are celebrating, and that can include the coming of spring, which doesn't want to show up here in Massachusetts, but ultimately it will be here, and we will all be complaining about the heat and humidity. Just give it about another week, and it will all happen, and we'll be miserable again, and won't that be nice? In terms of today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of labor-saving technology. I have long taken an interest in and even done research on labor-saving technology or technology in the workplace. Maybe it's because I had a front row seat to a lot of the technological transformations that we now pretty much take for granted. For instance, in the 9th grade, I had a typing class. All freshmen at my all-boys Catholic school had to take typing. And we had to do it in 1984 on fully manual typewriters. That's the kind for you kids out there where the keys would jam and you had to whack the return bar to get it back to the left margin. Those were some good times doing those time trials. Next year, not surprisingly, the school installed PCs for typing class. I'm not bitter, but it was one of those things that defined my luck going forward. I should say, have lived through dot matrix printers, dial-up modems, floppy disks, the actual floppy kind, cable television arriving and being installed in homes, not just pirating 2 channels after 9 o'clock, cell phones becoming ubiquitous, and a whole host of other advancements that promise to make my life easier and better. And I don't know about you, but I'm really not feeling that my life is easier and better. Making things more efficient doesn't mean the outputs are higher quality. Rather, they just become more frequent because the actual labor it takes to do an individual thing goes down. So one thing might be easier, but you know what happens? Nature abhors a vacuum, and the reduced time it takes to do one thing is filled by doing a lot of other things. Sure, it takes shorter time to get an email than snail mail, but only pop culture stars would even get the amount of letters that any of us get in emails on a given day. Could you imagine if we got the number of, physically written letters that we get in email? We would think we were pretty popular. And we don't have assistants to answer them back. So what are we going to do with all these emails? I don't feel popular because of all these emails. I feel bothered. Except for your emails that you send to feedback@experiencexdesign.com. I love those. So what does this all mean? I'm doing more and more, but does that mean I'm more and more successful? I can be in contact with more people, but am I more connected? I can produce more, but am I more productive? I can access the most advanced healthcare in human history, but am I healthy? Or am I healthier? These are the contradictions of our time. We were promised one thing, but we are finding ourselves in another place in another moment. And by the way, I'm still waiting for flying cars that I was promised when I was growing up. Still haven't happened. To tackle these deeper questions, not about the flying cars, but about everything else, I have Dr. Camille Preston on Experience by Design podcast. Dr. Preston received her PhD in psychology at the University of Virginia, for which her dissertation work on policing domestic violence received the APA International Best Dissertation Award, which you have to admit is pretty cool. That work led to a broader interest in trauma, grief, growth, and recovery. Today, as founder and CEO of AIM Leadership, she is an executive coach to senior leaders in major companies, a well-traveled keynote speaker, faculty member, advisor, and author. Her works include 3 books. 3. First one, or the first one I'll read, Living Real, Redefining Success, Presence, and Happiness. Also wrote Rewired, How to Work Smarter, Live Better, and Be Purposely Productive in an Overwired World, and the book Create More Flow, Igniting Peak Performance in an Overwired World. We talk about how there is a tendency to avoid difficult conversations and suppress trauma, which then impacts all aspects of our lives, including being effective leaders. She discusses the challenges of building authentic connections in this technological era, and as a result, organizations need to create places where people can build relationships through things like simple conversations and shared activities. Camille talks about moving from the information age and into what she calls the wisdom age, where individual AI will disrupt traditional sources of power and expertise. Finally, we discuss her work as and I love this term, business doula, helping individuals and organizations navigate transitions while giving birth to new possibilities. New term, business doula. After all, times of uncertainty create tremendous potential for growth. All we have to do to achieve that growth is to start embracing the woo. And so there's a lot of conversation about the woo as well. Great conversation. Hope you enjoy it. I appreciated you talking about transitions because yesterday my oldest daughter went to Italy for a semester, and I'm dealing with that. She has never been this far away from home for this long ever. And I had a moment when I was helping her shop for things at Target when we were walking by the baby aisle, and I went, I was shopping for her at the baby aisle, and now I'm shopping for her to go abroad for a semester in Florence, Italy.
Wow.
I know.
I hope you're going to go visit her.
I want to. It's a ways away and it's expensive and all those things, but I think it'd be one of those moments that you forget about how much it costs, but you remember the experiences that you had. So I definitely need to start organizing that. But just, you parent them and then then they go off and they become their own people and do their own things, and you just cross your fingers and hope for the best, I guess.
Yeah. You hope that they make all the choices based on all the upbringing.
Yeah, and that just, with all that's going on in the world, she got an announcement saying, there are protests going to be happening in Florence. It's like, the world we live in being full of all of this change and all of this tumult, and then you are experiencing your own personal transition, which is your daughter going away for a semester abroad.
I mean, it's legit. It's legit.
It is legit. And I imagine as a person with a psychology degree, how we both manage, I'm a sociologist, so I look at the larger structures, but also what happens to us individually in the midst of all of this change and what can we control and how can we navigate that and how can we chart our own course in the midst of all these things that so much of which we have no control over.
100%. That's a fabulous. And also, what are all the illusions? Because the reality, you are hitting the reality and embracing it. And a lot of times people cling to the illusion. That I do this, I can.
Yeah, what about those illusions? I mean, how much of I don't want to go into like a whole postmodernist, the whole world is, an illusion. Everything is just the meaning we construct for it. But how much of it is just, the problems we create in our minds that don't necessarily exist out there yet?
I'm just looking because it's been so long since I talked about it, but chapter 2 in the book is called The Lies We're Sold.
Yeah.
And there's so many lies we've bought into that like we've just taken as fact and they're not.
Right.
Right. And so that is, I think, a big part of what's going to be happening this year is disrupting all these assumptions we took as facts, I think is going to be.
What are some of the biggest assumptions you think that we are mistook as facts that are going to be called into question?
That success, like power, money, fame will make you happy.
Right.
I think it's fascinating that we inherited a religion that is our faith, our belief system, and we take it as fact. Like,
right.
Why don't we like actively consider that? If I just get this, then I'll be happy. If I put on this image, I'll be perceived as successful. I mean, they're everywhere.
I actually get to teach an intro to sociology class this semester, and it's not something I've done in a while. And what's kind of refreshing about doing that is it just makes us rethink some of these fundamental assumptions. Teaching the students to have this kind of sociological insight or sociological imagination to question all of these things that we assume to be true or we assume to be it is as it is because it's always been that way and it will always be that way.
100%. We make so many assumptions. We don't even like this for your daughter going to Florence. All these, they say, there was a psychologist many, many years ago, and I think his last name is James, but he said, you don't actually know yourself till you leave your country of origin.
Huh. Right.
And so it's are we live?
Yep.
Did we start recording?
Oh yeah.
Fabulous. Fabulous. My apologies. Yeah. So the psychologist said there's like 5 levels and you actually don't know yourself till you leave your family of origin, your town of origin, your community, your country. And when you step away, all of a sudden it all opens up. And so she's going to have her eyes wide open, not to mention with everything that's happening in the world right now.
I think, I forgot who said it, but, a fish doesn't realize it's in water until it's out of it. Because it's just all encompassing. I think in many ways, the culture that we live in is like that, obviously, that the things we assume to be taken for granted. But one of the nice things and one of the scary things about this moment, and we were talking about this before we started, was the ways in which all of our assumptions are being thrown up about, what it means to be us, given the imprint of AI on society and its ability to do things that we thought were only things that humans could do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can do it like super, super fast. I used to, I don't dream a ton, but when I do remember my dreams, I used to send them to a friend. Now he's on Mountain Time. Now I put him in ChatGPT and send him the dream and what ChatGPT says. And usually it's not wrong.
Did you ever have ChatGPT? That's amazing. Did you ever have ChatGPT like do a picture of it?
Oh, no, that'd be cool.
Do like an interpretive picture of the dream of what ChatGPT thinks it means?
I will have to check. I haven't done a lot with images, but I do think of it as a really nice partner.
Right.
I'm really present to humanity and what it can't do. And, when we are insecure of our own skills, there's a tendency to turn towards AI and say, well, what does AI think? And in that defaulting, I think we're going to start to lose a lot of texture.
If I was going to back up a little bit and ask you, what even brought you to psychology in the first place? Like what business psychology, what resonated? Was that like always the plan growing up? Other kids were playing, dressing up as a doctor or a fire person. And you're like, I'm going to dress up as a business psychologist.
I love it. Candidly, business psychologist was something that one of my clients who was in marketing, she said, for the love of the Lord, stop calling yourself a coach, an executive coach or a leadership coach. You're a business psychologist. And I remember thinking about it and being like, so we kind of coined that phrase as a business psychologist. But your question's a great one. And my dad, were he still alive, would say, from the time I was like 3.5, I was always asking these really hard questions. Right. And I'm the youngest. And so he never really thought that he never anticipated it. So an example was my grandfather committed suicide.
Okay.
And we spent every summer in this house that was his house. And there was no pictures of him. We called him by his first name, not grandpa. Huh. And we never spoke about him. So when it was summer. So I was like 3 months and 3 years and 3 months. And I remember him like, hey, can we talk about Roger? My dad's like, sure. I was
Okay.
like, well, if he's my grandfather, how come we don't, like I remember my dad. My dad was like, whoa.
Right.
So I do think there are some things that are innate, right? Like the power of questions and what have you. And I was come full circle. Years later, we were on the porch and you could set your watch to 5:00 when my dad cracked a beer and he'd be in the rocking chair. And we had this conversation that went something like, I'm really proud of you. I love what you're doing. He was very complimentary. And then he said, I just have no idea what you can tell an Army colonel about how to run the military. He'd been in the Navy. He'd been in the Air Force. And we had a funny conversation about that. And then the next day he said something like, from the time you were like 3, you were always asking the toughest questions. I just never knew you could make so much money asking questions.
Well, it's funny you said that about the military because so much of, especially psychology, but there was even sociology in, World War II where they were running these kinds of tests and looking at what was the optimal composition of a battalion size or, how do we determine who would be best in leadership positions. So even, I teach classes in user experience, human factors in large part emerged out of that. So much of applied social science is rooted in applications to military readiness and preparedness.
Yeah. And it's moving away from like tactical expertise to the humanity of how people show up.
Yeah. The military is comprised of people and we do study people, ergo. We would have something to say about that. But I think part of it also goes to, and I speak about this as a person who teaches at a business school, we create, again, an illusion between the hard stuff and the soft stuff, right? And the hard stuff is the stuff you really need to know to get the job done. And the soft stuff is like decorations in a house. It's nice as a compliment, but you can overdo it and it gets too messy.
I would say yes and to that because I think that's a reality of the world that's based on moving up, being successful is tied to expertise and knowledge. And as expertise and knowledge become more ubiquitous, I think the softer stuff is what's going to really differentiate people.
Right.
I'm curious, did that land?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think for sure this is one of the things because it used to be, I've been around for a little bit. It used to be the case that the hard stuff, the technical stuff was, as you said, differentiated, even though the person who's most technically savvy is often not the best manager of people. But okay, set that aside. Now that technology can rather quickly duplicate what that expertise is because it can be codified, the messier stuff of people, which are not easily codified, becomes more of our playground for humanity.
Yeah. 100%. And, it's only headed towards more complexity, right? Because, first we were managing people that we knew for years and years and years. And then there was more turnover. You were managing for people you didn't know as well. And then it was part hybrid, part remote. And then now it's like bots and people and hybrid and, it's the layers of complexity are thickening.
I'd be curious, and I love the idea of creating your own term as a business psychologist. I call myself a design sociologist, and people go like, what's that? I'm like, I don't know, I'm a sociologist who does design work. I don't know. But it's not a term you find a lot of, but we have to kind of create these names because of what people assume are professional degrees, refer to. Thinking about this notion of complexity and that often in companies or managers will try to create structures to reduce complexity. So we're going to standardize stuff, right? Because people are really complicated. So let's create rules in the workplace. But we don't operate that way, and stuff doesn't get done based on the rules. It gets done based on people's using their knowledge and expertise to navigate that complexity.
I think you're spot on. I think structures give people a container, like something that holds them so that they can then innovate. So I do think structure actually supports people, but what I heard in your description was structure more like legislation and rules, which causes people to contract.
Right.
I think there's two different ways that structure can be used to enliven and activate and bring out the best in people, or it can be used to get everybody to fall in line.
I've been actually wrestling with that as as an instructor, how much do you create structure, rubrics that you have to follow, these explicit guidelines, which I think that a lot of students find comfort in because they feel it's tangible and real, and they're very much people pleasers. They want to, give me the rules to follow, but at the same time, that constraining creativity and innovation, and trying to find that balance between the structure that they can feel comfortable in, provides guardrails, provides a signpost, but at the same time, I don't want you just to fall back to that and not use your brains and not think.
Yeah. You're hitting on something that's a key part of my last book, which is this idea that tension creates consciousness.
Right.
So if you have structure, you can actually hold the tension or the discomfort that is with that. And it's sitting in the tension that I think helps us grow. So for students, absolutely, the structure of like, I'm going to be able to predict, these are the questions he asks on his exams. These are the things that are predicted. Like that helps them kind of exhale so they maybe can hold meatier questions.
Right. And I think it's one of the things I've wrestled with, with generations, right? So Gen X. Yeah. One of the jokes I heard a comedian say is, to give you an idea about Gen X is, we all got together in classrooms to watch the teacher go up into space. And then we all watched the space shuttle blow up. And immediately after that, the teacher said, okay, time for a math test. There was no time out to process what we all just saw. It was deal with it. And so you have like that kind of extreme to the extreme of we don't want students to have to deal with friction, tension, unease, right? Let's make things easy so that you don't feel anxiety over something you have to perform, right? And that's not good either because a frictionless path doesn't necessarily lead to growth.
Yeah, 100%. I think you just nailed it there. This last book the idea was that life is like a sine wave. There are highs and lows. And as a culture, we've kind of blocked off and avoided the hard things, right? Like, oops, that blew up. Let's go do something else. Blocking that off. But what we actually do is when we refuse to see the hard things, we actually limit our ability to feel joy or delight or excitement. And so it's almost the way society has controlled emotions is the way medication controls depression, right? It minimizes the lows, but it also minimizes the highs, and it narrows or shallows the places that we live. And that shallowing is leading to depression, anxiety, burnout, isolation, loneliness in epic levels. And the shallowing is what AI is going to be able to do. So for people, it's the highs and the lows that give you texture and humanity and give you insight and wisdom. And if we refuse to feel those, all of a sudden we've narrowed what we can bring into the world.
I don't know if you saw the TV show. It's on right now on Apple TV called Pluribus.
No, I haven't.
It's wild because basically the gist of it is some kind of alien infection descends onto Earth, and what it causes people to do is essentially become a very happy hive mind. It's everyone's very happy and everyone's all interconnected. There's no crime, there's no violence, there's no angst, there's no highs or lows. Everything's just is copacetic. Hi. And one of the things I wonder about this is, except for there's 13 people on Earth who aren't infected with this thing. Where does art come from? Where does idea come from? Where does inspiration come from? Right? Where does music come from?
Absolutely.
And if you eliminate those highs and lows, as is happening in this show, it's just like 82 degrees all the time. Without those extremes, do we need those extremes in some ways to make us who we are as human beings?
Well, you're talking to New Englander to New Englander,
right?
And we chose a world where there's seasons, right? For that very reason, right? Like there's different textures, there's different experiences. I think that is the tension of AI. There's things it does really, really well, and there's a huge discomfort of what could become ubiquitous.
And you make me think: are we as a society essentially shallowing because we don't want to talk about the hard stuff, right? And so it's even going back to slavery that let's not talk about like a truth and reconciliation. Let's not talk about things that are overly difficult. And what ends up happening as often happens with people who have trauma, as a society, we have trauma, it explodes. Mm-hmm. You can only keep it bottled up so long until it manifests itself in unhealthy ways, which is why we have therapy. And as a society, we kind of like need collective therapy.
Well, another way of saying that is the metaphor I use is that when we put hard things in a box and put duct tape in the basement of our soul, we actually lose the second floor. And then all of a sudden it gets really, really crowded and we get numbed out. But the explosion is, I think, what people are terrified of. Right. And there's these things that are happening societally, globally, that are like firecrackers that I think the tension, the uncertainty, the fear, the angst that people are navigating is tied to that illusion that they can control things. Right.
So,
they can.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
That they can manufacture or control or suppress or hold or create a brand online. And I don't have any data to necessarily say this, but something cracks.
Right.
Something. And as a psychologist, I feel like I can say this. I think there's therapists that aren't necessarily serving people at the highest level because they're going backwards and like stewing in the shit rather than starting to say, okay, so what was right about that? What did you learn? How do you turn that forward? What does this mean? I think there's a lot of value in the reflection and the activation of what does that mean as a result.
Yeah, I love that because I've had a few therapists before, and the ones that I have not gotten much from, it's just basically me talking, and I'm like, okay, so like, what do I do? And they're like, well, what do you think you should do? I'm like, I don't know. You, the one with the degree, I'm paying you. Give me something to work with here. And I wonder, as a person working with executives and other people in business, who tell me what to do, make it easier. And you're coming with, well, let's explore the hard stuff. Let's talk about the complexities. Let's live in the tension. And how does that resonate with them? Are people, are they looking for that opportunity, or how do you package it to get them engaged in it if they're a little bit hesitant?
That's a great question. Most people come for to be better, to be they see someone else. They're like, whatever he's having, I want that. And the reality is what we do is we strengthen the container of who they are, give them more awareness and self-efficacy so that they can then step in to the full range, that they can then hold that whole level. I would often say that actually when my company turned 20 a couple of years ago.
Oh, congratulations.
It was fun. I did this retro. I went back and I interviewed people I'd worked with for 17 years ago. And I candidly was hoping for this huge ROI. My business exploded. My book of business increased this much. I was looking for that ROI, and people shocked me. They brought their kids to the conversation. Aww. They said, my son is taking psychology because of this. I have a relationship with my daughter that I could never have dreamed of. So who people were was better individuals. That's what they took pride in, rather than they had the ancillary, business success, upward mobility. And I think that goes back to this illusion that success is power, fame, money, this idea that if we get this, we'll be happy. And all those illusions, I think, are going to be really disrupted this year.
It makes me reflect on the idea that if we want to have better relationships, we first have to have a better relationship with ourselves, right? I mean, that's, this saying that let it begin with me. It has to start with me first. If I am, divorced from me, how can I show up and be connected authentically with others?
Yeah. And that's does my head talk to my heart? Does my head listen to my body? Am I connected to what really enlivens me? And all of those are hard questions. It's much easier to pop a pill, turn on Netflix, scroll, do something like that than be present.
Yeah, and I think I do wonder, as people look for more authentic connections, because it's harder to identify them, right? That if I am, if AI is writing the email, if AI is, curating my feed and my socials, if AI is selecting what music I'm listening to, how do I build those authentic connections with people who I think are showing up in a way that's true and that I can rely on ultimately as being an accurate representation in that interaction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And part of it is those take time. You can't just like pop it into AI and get a quick response. Relationships are built over time. There's a level of vulnerability, a level of authenticity, a level of genuineness. And I believe people genuinely crave connection. That muscle is just atrophied massively.
It definitely is. One of the ironies of this age is that with greater advances in communication technology, we are simultaneously feeling more and more disconnected.
100%.
Right, 100%. And
100%.
isolated.
1 in 5 adults feels lonely on a daily basis, which is the physical equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow. So
like that tells you that if I want to take care of my health, yeah, great. I went to the gym. But you know what? When I go to the gym, before we started, I was talking, I go to this hot Pilates class. There was snow on the ground here. It was cold. I was post red eye. But what I was really going for was a friend of mine started teaching that class. And I wanted her to know I'm supporting her. Right. So it's the physical activity, but it's the community that happens that actually also. And then there's all this data that when you're lifting weights in synchrony with others, it creates mirror neurons. It activates the neurochemicals. Like there's so much data about that connectiveness. And for people listening, it doesn't matter really how you connect. It's just taking that first step. It's connecting with a grocery checkout person. It's having those conversations that make that dial turn.
I was, when I teach a class in the spring semester, I teach a graduate class, and students often do observational work or ethnographic research into different sites. And I often have students who do ethnographic work in workout places like gyms of various kinds. And one of the things I said because I go to Planet Fitness, I said, one of the things that kind of all of a sudden struck me was nobody here asks another person to help spot them. This idea, for those who might not know, spotting is if I'm bench pressing or doing something, I might lift to exhaustion. I need someone's help so that the weight doesn't crash on my body. So I need a spotter. If I'm working out by myself, I might ask somebody, hey, can you spot me? None of that was happening. It's all machines. Everyone's working out on their own. No one's helping one another. And it's just, even though we're all occupying the same space, we're completely disconnected because everyone has their own earphones in.
So imagine you take that to every other area. No one's talking at the grocery store. No one's talking on the bus. No one's talking in the subway. No one's having these conversations. And it's almost like there's a curiosity of rewriting the rules of like, what is okay? How do you start to build those connections? If your students do the gym, I would be curious what they see at 5 a.m, 7 a.m, 4 p.m. Like, I bet there's a whole thing about time of day and who it attracts and how people engage.
Oh yeah, I think so too. And I've been going more in the afternoon, but I used to work out in the morning, and you had the hardcores, right, who were there, and it was like this, we're here together at so early in the morning in this misery that we're introducing on a voluntary basis. We have something in common. That's deep.
Well, and even just changing the misery, being like, we're hard asses working out early in the morning because we value our health. Like all of a sudden, there's like a whole opportunity there. It's interesting. I have, some might say it was a brilliant investment. Some might say it was good luck. I think it's reading people. About 13 years ago, my husband and I bought land in a community out in Utah of socially minded entrepreneurs. And we've been going there for 13 years. We absolutely love. But what it is it's a place where people mix and mingle. It's a container where people of like minds come together to be out in nature. And it's powerful to start to think intentionally about how do you put yourself in proximity with the authenticity you want, with the people you want, with the things you're driving towards.
Oh, yeah, we were chatting, and it kind of goes in workplaces. How do you create these collisions so that people can interact with one another in a way that is casual, real, that helps to build a foundation for these relationships. We were talking about going cross-country skiing in the town of Weston because it's a golf course and they make snow. And if there's no snow naturally, then it's one of the places around Boston where you can go. And one of the great things about that place, even though it's just a golf course, is that because it's a container, right? It's a limited space. You will see the same people there. And so I can go there and I will start chit-chatting with people who I see on a regular basis, just in that moment. This, what I would call, the spontaneous outbreaks of community.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And to go back to the exams, like there's a container that holds the students, right?
Right.
But then there's a level of vulnerability. You're out in the cold. You have a shared passion.
Right. And so as companies are wrestling with this idea of, back to the office, right? Return to office mandates, or how do we create what I like to call workplace communities? What steps do you see people taking, and how do you try to coach them on the importance of this? Because it does move beyond just beanbag chairs and, ping pong tables. And it kind of goes into, are we creating spaces for people to connect? Not just physical spaces, but temporal spaces where they have the time to connect.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think there is a need to be in proximity with people. I think most companies are thinking about it from profitability. They are not thinking about, or I think there's many more layers that people could be exploring, or putting attention and intention to the layers below it help create a deeper activation, right? So if you think about what you spend on people and workspaces, bringing in meals, healthy meals that force people to come together,
right,
give them space to break bread, that's a really good investment. A meditation class, woo-woo, right? So woo-woo, but it's bringing people together, and it's an investment in people, and it's creating that proximity, whether it's, meditation, yoga, breath work, even a like-minded thing that people are curious about, right? Whether, in investing or skill building, it's creating places where people can come together, where they feel like there's an investment in them and there's a space to bring their full self. A level of authenticity is really key.
It reminds me of, I will have students who do internships, from a sociological perspective, but in business spaces. So I've had, one students do internships who are accounting majors, and they were doing it in tax firms. So during tax season, they're kind of getting nailed, right? And so I remember this one student in her field notes was like, and then we all had lunch. I'm like, well, wait a second, you all had lunch. What do you mean? Well, yeah, the partners bring in lunch during tax season, as a thank you. And so we all get together, in the same room and we have lunch. And she was saying it as if it's like a secondary thing. I'm like, oh my God. Let's focus on that, because I said, look, what's happening during those times? People were talking about the firm. They're talking about cases they're working on. They're talking about tax law. They're also talking about each other, what's going on with their lives. It was creating those spaces, right? And an open office is, what cracks me up about open offices is that you can have an open office and everyone on their headphones, like the gym, where everyone's in the shared space, but everyone is isolated.
Blinders on them. Yep.
Right.
It's funny. I've never connected this dot until just this moment, but the community that I mentioned in Utah that we ski at, Reed Hastings, who's well known for Netflix, bought the majority ownership. And when he did, he implemented free breakfasts, which is probably the most economical thing he could do. But what it meant is that all the neighbors came together, and there was a mixing pot, and there was an opportunity, and the love that is in that space, were the relationships that you've seen over time, the hip replacements, the knees, the babies, and it's multi-generational, and it's people from a lot of different parts of the world coming together. It's funny. That's like Reed basically bought lunch.
Yeah, well, exactly. And
we pay for it, right? Nothing's ever free, but.
Well, yeah, the idea of, and I said to my student about the lunches for, the tax professionals, I said, a short-sighted view would be, well, let's increase profitability and productivity by having people eat lunch at their desk. What would be lost? What would be lost is this communal moment, right? This container of community. and this opportunity for people to connect and be invested in a shared identity that's co-constructed. Now we're talking academically, but that's essentially what's taking place. And that when you take that out, you're not just, sure, you might be saving money on lunch, but you're also losing a lot in terms of creating culture.
Yeah. And the research shows that you can only really focus with intensity for 90 minutes, right? So having this forced break actually might accelerate performance because people really recharge and then they go back. It's an interesting, maybe we'll check in at the end of the semester. Maybe you'll get some kids to study that, some students.
Yeah, I think so, because it raises the question of how much does technology take us out of each other, right? And that, one of the things I joke about is when I was young and driving, my mom was driving me someplace, I had to listen to her music. Now my kids get to listen to their music because they might have earplugs in or AirPods. I got, an appreciation of Frankie Valli. I got an appreciation of things that I would never get in touch with. And it was a shared moment. And we can be in a shared space, but not have shared moments.
I think that's a huge thing. And it goes down to the relationships. Like you can be having a conversation, but if there's not that level of authenticity, you don't need to actually hit what's
go ahead.
real.
It goes to your book, Rewired, right? That we're not Luddites here. I don't think either of us are saying that, hey, we should, go live in a commune, although some days that does sound nice, to be completely disconnected. But it's how do we become the agentic, individuals who are in control of this stuff and not being the things that are being taken over, being controlled?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's getting in the driver's seat. It's partnering, getting in the driver's seat, but having all the resources in the tip of your awareness. There's something that's going in the back of my mind, which was when I was a kid, my parents used to pay extra money to get a car without a radio because they really wanted to promote family conversations. And so I just think, God, I said that to my kids this break when they were like, I want to listen to this song. And, it's like, how
is it more money to get something taken out? It seems like that should be less money. Because
it's non-normative, right? Right. You have to, it's like a special order to the shop.
I mean, back in Detroit, we just would leave our car unlocked. That would solve that problem. I mean, if you want your radio out of the car, that's an easy one to fix. You can always find someone to do that for you.
Love it. I love it.
Even with I want to listen to this music, I want to listen to that music, it does teach negotiation. It does teach frustration. Again, the highs and lows. It does teach tolerance of not getting what one wants. And when our entire environment is customizable to our desires, it is taking out that friction. It is kind of, as you talk about, reducing to the mean. It is taking out the extremes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, love Spotify, but it reduces your likelihood to hear different and new music, right? Because you can skip.
So, we were talking about this year being kind of like a pivot. Every year is a pivotal year, I guess, looking back on it. But this year being kind of pivotal with all the, technological advancements, changes, frictions, questions. What do you see as some of the bigger issues people are going to be managing, both personally and in terms of, as a society, but also in terms of workplaces?
I think there's so much uncertainty in the world, and to be present to that uncertainty creates a huge opportunity for growth, existential growth. Fast Company had an article, years ago that was called Change or Die. And I feel like that's what's happening now. It's like evolve, adapt, engage, or become obsolete. And there's a huge amount of possibility in that. And there's a huge amount, you could either see it as growth or angst. And I think choosing kind of the humanity, choosing to put yourself in the driver's seat, choosing to engage with the changes that are coming is going to be a really differentiating year for people. I'm curious, does that resonate with what you're seeing?
Yeah, I absolutely think so, because one of the things we kind of know from a sociological standpoint is that periods in which there's massive technological change in a fundamental way drive societal change, because we have to reorganize society. I mean, this kind of gets Marxian around, quote unquote, the means of production, but it is true that we organize societies around the ways people work and the technology that produces or that facilitates that work. And as that technology changes, society changes. And we're seeing that happen right now. So the question becomes, where do we fit in? Where do we fit in at work? Where do we fit in at home? Where do we fit in with one another? Where do we fit in to ourselves, right? How do we fit in? What's our space? What do we own? Who are we? Going back to this existential point. And that's going to be a major reckoning, is where do we fit in? And how do we structure things?
And I think you're going to see people who are going to actually have their eyes wide open, and they're going to have a lot of illusions shattered, right? Like, not to get political, but we thought democracy was like air, right? It was like a God-given right. And we're starting, maybe not so much. And so how do you stay present to the changes that are happening? How do you embrace the shattering of assumptions, the shattering of and really sit in the question of what does that mean for us, without going into despair, without going into hyper need to control, but holding that is going to be, it's going to shift. I think it's going to rock our world. It's going to really differentiate who has started to do their own work, who has built their own container, their own awareness, their own self-awareness to navigate. I think it's going to, I have a feeling it's going to be a bumpy year, but it's going to open a lot of new possibilities. Does that resonate with what you're seeing?
It does. I used to be a really strong believer in democracy until I started studying people. And then I went, we're in charge of this, huh? Oh dear. No, I mean, but seriously, the idea of, I don't like creating simplified buckets, but people who might be reactive to change in one bucket, people might be proactive to change in another bucket. Those who are reactive are going to view regression as an answer. We need to go back and fight against this change. People who see proactive see this change as opportunity, right? And then it's, you're going back to your social responsibility and entrepreneurship, do we see this as an opportunity to enrich society? Do I see it as an opportunity to enrich myself? So these are some of the very fundamental basic questions I think we're going to be reckoning with as individuals and as a society in terms of regression, progression, individual, collective.
I spot on. And there's a thread underneath that, which is scarcity or abundance. Right. There's the regression is a contraction, a hoarding, a holding for myself. The progression is uncertainty, complexity, belief in one another, vulnerability into new possibilities.
And I think we go back to one of the great ironies is that at a time when we can produce more, we can have greater abundance, people are also experiencing more scarcity in many ways, right? Because of the model. And so what does that mean? I'm not smart enough to tell anybody, but, at the same time, we have, certain political ideologies. In some places, we have Zohran Mamdani, who's mayor of New York, right? So we're starting to see people, I think, from an analytical perspective, exploring those extreme, not that Zohran Mamdani is extreme, but the diversified approaches to scarcity, individual regression, or abundance, progression, collective.
I think that's 100. Very, very, very true. And I think to put a layer on for people who are listening, there's the knowledge age or the data age, and we're moving into the wisdom age, which is really that individual. AI is going to disrupt anything that can be automated, systematized, organized. All of that is going to become the expertise that used to differentiate people. And a lot of times that goes to power, that goes to proximity, that goes to the elite kind of white male clubs. Right. Used to have a lot of power because of their proximity and expertise. That's becoming disrupted. And all of a sudden it's opening up a whole new set of possibilities. And so, you're the sociologist. What do you think about this idea of extinction burst?
What's extinction burst?
This idea that before, like it comes from developmental psychologists, I think, but before your child grows out of a bad behavior, it comes in like a torrent, right? There, you have this mass misbehavior, or this behavior becomes extreme or really abundant before it becomes extinct.
Yeah, that's what we call hitting rock bottom, right?
That's so true.
You gotta hit your bottom, right? What's your bottom? Well, it's different for everybody. You might think it's a bottom, but there's always another bottom. And, to the point where going to like addiction models, either you figure out the extinction burst, right? Something's got to change, or you die, right? Or the behavior becomes so entrenched that it's self-destructive. And sure, I definitely could see that where, the behaviors that are manifesting are not sustainable, whether it be from a, environmental perspective, capital accumulation perspective, whether it be from a retrenchment perspective, right? Something's got to give because it's not viable. And it's not a political statement on my part. It's just an analytical statement. Something's got to give. And what that then looks like is up to us to decide.
Mm-hmm. And to make it really tangible, your pants get too tight. You either got to get to the gym, change what you eat, or buy bigger pants, right?
Right.
Like, it happens on a personal level. It also is happening on a societal level.
And I've watched my 600-pound life. At a certain point, you can't find pants that big. No, I've watched my 600-pound life, right? That TV show. There's only, they don't make pants that big anymore. And I even say it as a joke. It's like the extinction event. It's not sustainable. You can't keep doing this. You will die as a society, as a planet. You can't keep doing this. It is not sustainable. So either change the behavior or accept the inevitable outcome. But it kind of goes back to what we first started talking about is in order to see alternatives, we have to get out of our present self, our present ideology, our present moment, and see it from the outside.
So that's tension creates consciousness. You have to be able to hold the tension that your pants don't fit, or you have to sit in that level of discomfort. And, for all of us, we have our own vices, whether it's working out a lot, scrolling, Netflix, eating, drinking. We have all these vices to keep us from being able to see that side. And I'm not saying strip them all, but start to build that awareness. Start to engage with someone who can help you build a container so you can hold those. This shows up the number of people who the kids finally leave for college and they get divorced because they haven't built the container of their marriage, right? The number of people who have a cataclysmic life event, a health event that all of a sudden cracks them open, right? Do this before you get cracked open is, I think, the invitation to everyone listening. That
should be your catchphrase. Do this before you get cracked open. Book a call now. It's almost like a call to action. Don't get cracked open. Call Camille. Or put it on a bumper sticker. And you can. I
have a good friend who talks about shucking, like oysters, and like cracking open the oyster to find the pearl, Jessica. And I do, in my heart of hearts, I think we all crave that type of authentic connection. I think we all crave living real, which is obviously the title of the book. But I think we desperately want that, and we are absolutely terrified of it. And so I see my role as being a steward, being maybe a doula to help you live more real, and to create that compassion, that container, that capacity. Because when you see yourself, you're going to be able to lead your organization differently. Dysregulated leaders have dysregulated organizations, and that's expensive, really, really expensive.
I really like, rather than business psychologist, I really like business doula. I think you should go with that as your new branding. Camille Preston, a business doula.
Someone's been kicking my tail, of someone who I admire. He keeps calling me a transitional facilitator. He's like, you are that person that holds that space for people to transition to who they want to be. But transitional facilitator, I think, could be interpreted. I'll go with business doula.
I think that's great because no one else is calling, I don't think. No one else is calling them a business doula. So what do you do? I'm a business doula. I help to birth businesses. The painful process.
I used to call myself a secret agent for love. And part of it was I was recruited by the FBI to join their team and opted not to. But I do think it's about helping people figure out what does it mean to love at a deep level themselves, the path where they go. And you can't talk about that in business necessarily, but I think it's what we all crave.
Secret agent for love. I mean, you have a lot of titles. I'm jealous. Business psychologist, business doula, secret agent for love.
Who knows?
Are those all on your LinkedIn? They should be. My goodness.
I will revisit that. I'll revisit that. I love your energy.
The next book has to be Secret Agent for Love or Business Doula, or maybe both, because with the love comes the need for a doula, I guess.
And think about it. I know you have kids. I've had a couple of kids, whether it was birthing a book or birthing a kid. It's a hard process, right? There's a lot of growing and stretching and change. And for anyone who's raised kids, like as soon as you figure it out, it changes, right? Like that's like by definition.
Yeah, exactly. As my daughter goes off to Italy, that's different, and I have friends who are empty nesters and they're like, oh, it's so hard. And I look at their lives. I'm like, it must be nice. Because you kind of have this moment of, exhale, because you don't have to drive the kids around. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. But at the same time, there is that emptiness and that transition. So this is a year of transitions for sure, right? There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Technological, societal, cultural, and individual, and even potentially political, as it is a election year, 2026, right? That is a House turnover year. And so there's maybe a lot of transitions, and it's the matter of how do we put ourselves in the best position to live those transitions in a way that's beneficial for us and for each other, which is why you need a transitional facilitator.
I love it. And there's something as I'm listening to you, there's so much transition ahead. And I think one of my own aspirations in this year ahead is to have joyful presence through it. Yeah. And joyful sounds a little woo, but it's so easy to wish away the here and the now. And yet, like all that angst that you're feeling of my daughter's going to Italy and she's going to be in this new country and that's a long ways away and there's protests and all of that. And God, aren't you lucky that you love your daughter so much that you're like present to her leaving? And there's so much that she's going to blossom into. And there's so much she's going to struggle with and appreciate about parenting, right? Like there's so much happening. So for everyone listening, it's going to be a year of uncertainty and change and possibility. How can you hold that tension? How do you be present so that you can become that best version of yourself? And I have one
last term for you, a woo advocate, because I do think that we need to embrace the woo, because joy, love, presence, mindfulness might be woo, but they're all really essential. So bring back the woo.
I love that. Bring back the woo. Cracking open your woo. Maybe that becomes...
There we go. Look, we've generated all these ideas. Well, Camille, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your work, your books, your insights, and what to look forward to in 2026.
Such a pleasure. I can't wait to continue the conversation and see what changes.
I want to thank Dr. Camille Preston for joining me to talk about living real, being overwired and how to overcome it, transitions and transformation, and even her dissertation, which I can appreciate might have been going back a little bit. And I don't know what I could say about mine, but I'm sure it was interesting when I did it. You can find out more about her work, her books, and AIM leadership in my links in the show notes. As always, you can share feedback at feedback@experiencexdesign.com. I love receiving your emails, so make sure you send them to me and keep them coming my way. And if you want to subscribe and stay on top of all of the EXD news while you're over at experiencexdesign.com, just put in your email and I'll make sure to keep you in the loop. And while you're there, you can also swing over to the donations link to buy me a coffee and to help defray the cost of the podcast. And as always, make sure you keep me in mind for any Experience by Design needs you might have, which can include, but not limited to, keynote speaking, training, professional development, running different kinds of operations, weddings and bar mitzvahs, whatever it is where you need an experienced design professional. I'm definitely your person. So shoot me an email at gary@garyconnects.com or DM me through LinkedIn. Seriously, there's a lot of things I can help you with, so make sure you reach out and let me help you. I really want to. And with that, folks, as always, remember to be safe, be kind, be well, and be here next week for Experience by Design. Bye.